My name is Gloria Harper, and I'm 76 years old. I spent my life teaching second graders, raising 2 children, and stretching every penny so my family could live a life I never had. I buried my husband 15 years ago and swore I'd never bury my spirit, too. I've always been the kind of woman who gives without asking for anything in return, but that was before my son married her, before I gave them a house, and before she banned me from stepping foot in it. It happened on a Saturday afternoon, under a cloudless sky and a world that seemed so calm it mocked my storming heart. I had just bought them their first home. A beautiful 4-bedroom house nestled in a quiet Texas suburb with a wraparound porch and a garden that reminded me of the one my husband and I once built together. I used the last chunk of my savings, money I had stashed away for my twilight years. I handed my son David the keys with tears in my eyes and told him, "This is for your future, for your family, from your mama with love." He hugged me. His eyes even welled up. But she, Melissa, his wife, barely looked at me. Still I smiled. I let it go. I thought, maybe she's overwhelmed. Maybe she's not good with emotions. Maybe I'll give her time. That time never came. 1 week later they planned the housewarming. I baked 2 apple pies, packed my best Sunday dress, and even crocheted a Home Sweet Home banner I spent 3 nights working on. I was proud. I was excited. I was naive. That morning I received a text from Melissa. It read, "Hi Gloria. Just wanted to let you know the housewarming today is family only. Hope you understand. We're trying to keep it small. Maybe another time. Red heart." I stared at the message. Family only. Was I not family? I blinked back tears, then texted David. No response. I drove by the house later that evening anyway. My pies still in the passenger seat. I stayed in my car across the street, under the shadow of a neighbor's tree. I saw balloons, laughter, music. I saw Melissa's parents walk in carrying wine. Her cousins. Her aunt with the beehive hairdo I once complimented at their wedding. But me. I wasn't welcome. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. That house, the one I paid for, had become a castle where I was the peasant left out at the gate. And still I said nothing. Until the next morning, when I walked into the county clerk's office with a quiet smile, holding a deed that still bore my name. Because what Melissa and David didn't know was that I never signed over the full ownership. Not yet. And I wasn't planning to anymore. What I did next shook their new little world like an earthquake they never saw coming. But before we get there, let me take you back. Back to when I thought love meant giving everything, even to people who forgot how to say thank you. Because that's where this story truly begins. Stay with me because what came next nearly broke me, and then rebuilt me in ways I never expected. If this story touched your heart or made you want to see what happens next, please like, comment, and subscribe. You won't believe what Grandma does in the next chapter. Before Melissa came into the picture, my son David was the kind of boy who called me every Sunday. Even when he moved away for college, he'd ring just to hear me talk about my garden or the birds nesting outside my window. He never forgot birthdays or anniversaries. He used to say, "You're my best girl, Ma." That's what made the betrayal burn like acid. It wasn't just about the house. It was about the slow way he stopped seeing me. The beginning of it all was subtle. After they got married, Melissa made little comments that felt like harmless jokes, until they weren't. "Your mom sure likes to be involved, huh?" Or, "We should probably teach her about boundaries." I'd laugh it off. I wanted to keep the peace. I thought maybe I was being too involved. But deep inside I knew something had changed. I remember one particular day. A Sunday dinner I cooked for them. I had spent hours preparing David's favorite roast, mashed potatoes from scratch, and even baked cornbread just the way he liked it. I wore my floral apron and set the table with my best china. When they arrived, Melissa walked in, took one look at the meal and said, "Wow, this is heavy. We're trying to stay plant-based now." I stood there, smiling like a fool, while David just looked down at his phone and mumbled, "Yeah, thanks, Ma." The roast went cold. That night, I cried in the kitchen sink while scraping untouched food into the trash. But I told myself, it's just growing pains. New marriage. She'll come around. Oh, how wrong I was. A few months later, I overheard Melissa talking to someone on the phone when she didn't realize I was in the hallway. Her voice was sharp and full of bitterness. She's always here like she owns the place. David's too soft to set boundaries, so I guess I'll have to. Honestly, I don't care if she bought us groceries or whatever. She needs to understand this is our life now. That was the first time I ever felt like a stranger in my son's world. But the worst part, David knew. He knew how Melissa treated me. And he allowed it. That's when I started pulling back. I stopped showing up uninvited. I stopped calling as much. I tried to give them space, thinking it might help. Until one rainy Thursday, David called me out of the blue. "Ma, we've been looking at houses, and there's this one. It's perfect. But we're short on the down payment." I swallowed the hurt. The memories. The disrespect. I remembered that roast. But I also remembered the baby boy I used to rock to sleep. The toddler who used to run into my arms. So I said, "How much do you need?" They needed $85,000. I gave them $100,000. Told them to keep the change. David cried. Melissa texted a lukewarm thank you. I told myself again, this would bring us closer. This would fix things. So when I found out about the housewarming party that I wasn't invited to, it wasn't just a slap. It was a knife. But that Sunday morning, when I walked into the clerk's office holding the deed in my purse, I realized something. They had forgotten what I was worth. But I hadn't. I had left one line unsigned, transferring full ownership. I had kept my name on the deed just in case. Call it old age wisdom. Call it mother's instinct. Call it divine intervention. The clerk looked at me, brows raised. "You want to revoke the partial grant?" I nodded slowly. Yes. Effective immediately. And just like that, the house stopped being theirs alone. I had a copy of the original contract, bank transfer records, and the proof that the purchase had been made solely under my name. The agreement to transfer joint ownership. Never finalized. Never notarized. And legally, that made all the difference. Now came the hard part. I had to tell David. And I had to do it face to face. So the next day, I knocked on their brand new door, the one I had paid for, holding a manila folder under my arm. Melissa answered, wine glass in hand, smug smile on her lips. "Oh, Gloria. We weren't expecting company." I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Good. I didn't come to visit. I came to reclaim what's mine." Before she could respond, David walked into the hallway. His face dropped when he saw me. "Ma." I handed him the folder. "Read it," I said. "Then we'll talk." He opened it, flipping through the pages slowly. His lips moved silently as he read. Then his hands started to shake. "What is this?" "The house is still mine," I said. "You're living here under the assumption that I handed it over." "I didn't." Melissa scoffed. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm very serious," I replied. "And you? You told me I wasn't family. That I wasn't welcome in the home I bought. So now I'm making sure that home welcomes me, or no one." The silence in that hallway was louder than any thunder I've ever heard. David looked between us. "Ma, please. Let's talk about this." I leaned in close. "You should have done that before you let her humiliate me." Then I turned and walked back to my car. But what happened 3 days later would set off a fire neither of them saw coming. Because taking back the house was just the beginning. What I found hidden in the garage next changed everything. Are you ready for what Grandma finds next? Trust me, you won't want to miss the next chapter. Like, comment, and subscribe if you believe no one should ever underestimate a quiet old woman with a sharp memory and a full folder. 3 days after I handed David that folder, the house grew quiet. No music, no cars out front, no laughter from the porch. It was like someone had sucked the life out of it, and maybe they had. I didn't want to gloat. I really didn't. I just wanted them to know I wasn't a fool. But something deep in my bones told me the silence meant more than shame. Meant secrets. On the fourth day, I got a call from the realtor who'd handled the property for me. He said, "Mrs. Harper, I passed by the house earlier. Just checking on the neighborhood, you know. Noticed something strange. The garage door was open, lights were on, but nobody was home." I thanked him and hung up. But something in his voice stuck with me. It wasn't concern, it was confusion. So I drove out there. It was around 6:30 p.m., just after sunset, when I pulled up to the curb. The house stood there like a stubborn child, silent, lit, and pretending everything was fine. But the garage door was cracked open just enough to whisper, "Something's off." I walked up, heart pounding, and pushed the garage door fully open. Inside, under a cheap tarp and next to a broken folding chair, sat a box. A large, taped-up box with shipping labels and David's name on it. But that wasn't what caught my eye. It was the stack of unopened mail stuffed inside, mostly from collection agencies. And then, a file folder labeled "Refinancing Options. Urgent." My hands trembled as I opened it. Melissa and David had been trying to take out a secret mortgage on the house. Behind my back. Even before the housewarming. They planned to leverage its full value for a loan, without telling me, of course. Because they thought I'd already signed everything over. They had met with banks, filled out forms, even forged my signature on one of them. I took photos of everything, every page, every letter. And that was the moment I stopped feeling sorry for them. That was the moment I stopped calling it our mess. Because it wasn't a mess anymore. It was theft. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, remembering all the times I had gone without so David could have more. Remembering the shoes I patched with glue, the dresses I wore threadbare, the days I skipped meals to make sure the kids ate enough. I raised him better than this. Didn't I? The next morning I made 2 phone calls, one to my lawyer and one to the police. By the time Melissa and David woke up, the doorbell was ringing and 2 uniformed officers stood on their front porch. Not to arrest them yet, but to issue a formal warning. Fraud is a crime. Forgery is a crime. And there was now a pending investigation. Melissa called me 6 times that day. I didn't answer. David left voicemails, some angry, some teary. I didn't respond. I needed them to feel what I had felt sitting in my car outside that housewarming. Alone. Unwanted. Betrayed. The next day, I showed up at the house with a locksmith. David came stumbling out in sweatpants, shouting, "Ma, what are you doing?" "Changing the locks," I said calmly. "You'll have 48 hours to vacate." Melissa pushed past him, waving her phone at me. "You're insane. We'll fight this. We have rights." I looked her straight in the eye. "No, dear. You had privileges. And you spat on them." The locksmith didn't even blink. Just went about his business. I left them standing in the driveway with nothing but their pride. But before I drove off, something strange happened. A neighbor across the street, a young woman with a baby on her hip, walked over to my car. She knocked on the window and said softly, "I just wanted to tell you, I'm proud of you. We've seen how she treated you. You're not crazy. You're brave." Tears welled up in my eyes. I didn't even know her name. That night I sat on my porch, sipping chamomile tea, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. But it didn't last. Because 2 nights later, someone broke into the house. And what they left behind on the kitchen counter made my blood run cold. Photo of me. With a red X slashed through it. This just got real. Who broke in? Why the photo? And how far will Melissa go now that her game is falling apart? Don't miss the next chapter that things are about to explode. Like, comment, and subscribe if you believe no one should threaten a woman who's just getting started. I hadn't slept in over 24 hours. That image haunted me. The red X scrawled across my photo like a target, as if my very existence was a problem someone needed to solve. I picked it up from the kitchen counter with gloved hands, making sure not to smudge whatever fingerprints might be on it. I called Officer Darby, the same man who came with the locksmith. He showed up within the hour. "You're telling me you found this on the counter?" he asked, eyeing the photo carefully. I nodded, my arms folded tightly across my chest. "There was no sign of forced entry," I said, voice trembling. "Whoever did this used a key." Darby's face tightened. "Well then, we know who had one, don't we?" I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. Melissa. That woman had turned from cold and dismissive to something far more dangerous. Unpredictable. Desperate. Vindictive. And my son. He had gone silent. No calls. No text. Like a child caught in a lie too big to crawl out of. The police dusted for prints and promised to run them, but I wasn't naive. I knew how long these things took. And I knew that whoever walked into that house wanted me to feel afraid. It worked. But fear wasn't going to win. The next morning I filed for a restraining order. By noon it was granted. Melissa and David were legally banned from entering the property. The locks had already been changed, but now I had paperwork to back it up. That should have been the end of it. But life rarely gives you clean endings when bitterness is involved. At 6:14 p.m., I heard tires screech outside my house. I peeked through the blinds and saw Melissa's car parked at a diagonal angle, halfway on the curb. She didn't come to the door. She didn't knock. She just stood in the street, staring. I didn't go outside. I didn't need to. 10 minutes later, she peeled off and disappeared into the night. But something about her face stayed with me. Wild, unhinged, almost hollow. That was when I decided to install cameras. Every window. Every angle. The entire property. I wasn't just defending a house anymore. I was defending my peace, my dignity, and the years of sacrifice they'd tried to turn into ashes. 3 days passed quietly. Then, just as I began to relax, the footage came in. It was 3:08 a.m. A figure crept through my backyard. A hood pulled low. Gloves. Slow, methodical steps. They stopped at the fuse box. I watched on the screen as they opened it, pulled something out, and everything went black. My entire security system, disabled in one snap. But what they didn't know was that I had a backup. A hidden battery-powered trail camera pointed straight at the backyard entry. I reviewed that footage with trembling fingers. It wasn't Melissa. It was David, my son. My own flesh and blood, sneaking through the shadows like a burglar in the night. I watched him disappear into the garage. Could hardly breathe. My phone rang just as I was about to call the police. It was him. "Ma!" His voice cracked through the speaker. "Can we talk?" I didn't respond. "Please. I know you're upset. I made some mistakes." "Mistakes?" I whispered. "You called trespassing and attempted fraud a mistake?" There was a pause. "I didn't know what she was doing," he said, voice trembling. "She was pushing me, Ma. I didn't know how to stop her." I felt the last string holding my heart to his voice snap in two. "You're not a child anymore, David. You're a grown man. You had a choice. But we needed the money. Melissa's been out of work for months and I lost mine." That hit me like a freight train. He had lost his job. And instead of coming to me like a son, I said slowly, "You plotted like a thief." He didn't respond. Just heavy breathing on the line. Hung up. And I called my lawyer. Because this wasn't just personal now. It was legal. The next day I filed a formal lawsuit, seeking damages for attempted fraud, defamation, emotional distress, and property tampering. It wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. You don't get to hurt someone who built you, and walk away without consequence. But just when I thought things were starting to settle, I received a letter in the mail with no return address. I opened it and read 5 chilling words. "You will never be safe." And taped to the bottom, a copy of my original birth certificate. Something I hadn't seen in over 40 years. How had they gotten that? What did they want now? I held the paper in my hands, and a cold shiver ran through my bones. Someone had crossed a line I didn't even know existed. And what I discovered next would turn this entire battle into something much darker than just a family feud. What secret does that birth certificate hold? Who's truly pulling the strings behind this madness? If you think the worst is over, you're not ready for the next chapter. Like, comment, and subscribe to uncover the truth with me, because this story is far from over. I stared at that piece of paper for what felt like hours. My birth certificate, something so basic, so buried in the past, now used like a threat. The handwriting on the envelope was blocky and stiff, like someone had tried to disguise it. But there was no mistaking the message. You will never be safe. At first, I tried to tell myself it was just another scare tactic from Melissa. Her way of trying to rattle me now that the legal tide had turned. But the birth certificate changed everything. That wasn't something she could have just picked up from my house. It wasn't even in my home. It had been locked away in a safety deposit box at a bank I hadn't visited in 2 decades. I drove straight there. The manager, an older gentleman with kind eyes, pulled up my records and led me to the vault. My heart pounded in my chest as I unlocked the narrow silver box with shaking hands. Every document gone. My birth certificate, marriage license, my husband's war medals, the handwritten will we'd both signed before he passed. All of it gone. Replaced with a single sheet of paper. You should have stayed quiet. I dropped the paper and stumbled backward, gasping. The manager called security, and the police came within the hour. An investigation was opened, but even I knew the chances of finding whoever did this were slim. That's when I realized. This wasn't just about the house anymore. This was war. And someone had help. Melissa and David didn't have the power to access a private safety deposit box without forged identification. Not without someone else. Someone who knew my details intimately. Someone with access to banking systems. That night, I called my old friend Hazel, a retired clerk from the same bank where I'd opened that box. She answered on the 3rd ring. Hazel, did anyone from my family ever inquire about my accounts? Or try to access any of my personal records? She hesitated. Then said, Gloria, I didn't want to get involved, but yes. About 3 weeks ago, a woman came in with a fake ID in your name. I recognized her from David's wedding photos. That's why I flagged it internally, but I didn't think she'd get past the system. I swallowed hard. She did. Hazel gasped. Oh my lord. It all made sense now. Melissa had crossed more lines than I'd imagined. She was no longer just manipulative, she was dangerous. And she was growing bold. Desperate. Mercy. That gave me an opening. If she was willing to risk everything, she'd eventually slip. And I'd be ready. I hired a private investigator the next morning. His name was Rick. Tough voice, gentle eyes, and a record of cracking cases involving family fraud. I handed him every file, every photo, every police report. She's gone too far, I told him. I need the truth. All of it. Rick nodded. You'll get it, Ms. Harper. Just don't confront her again until I finish the dig. People like this. They unravel faster than you think. He was right. Because 1 week later, the unraveling began. The PI returned with surveillance footage. Melissa meeting with a man behind an abandoned storage lot on the outskirts of town. The same man who had notarized the forged loan papers. A disgraced mortgage broker. They were planning to resubmit the paperwork using a shell buyer. Fake buyer. Someone Melissa could manipulate to purchase the house after pressuring me into selling it out of fear. She wanted me out. She wanted the property clean. And she had nearly pulled it off. The kicker. David knew. Rick had tapped into one of Melissa's burner phones. On one recorded call, she said clearly, David's getting cold feet. He thinks she's gonna forgive him. I told him if he doesn't finish this with me, I'll tell his mother what really happened to the money she gave us for the house. That's when it hit me. It wasn't just about the deed. They had spent the money. The house had been mortgaged to the limit. Melissa had rerouted nearly $70,000 of the funds I gave them into private accounts and fake investments. She'd been laundering my retirement savings right under my nose. And David, he let her. The boy I raised. The one I swore would never lie like his father did. He'd let it happen. I sat in the dark that night, tea untouched, lights off, listening to the hum of the world outside. Felt numb. But I also felt clear. This was no longer about forgiveness. It was about closure. I made one final visit to my lawyer. We prepared a cease and desist. Froze the mortgage broker's account with evidence from the investigator. Launched a civil suit for property fraud. Filed for full damages including emotional distress and financial abuse. By the end of the week, Melissa's accounts were frozen. David's car was repossessed. And the brokerage firm went under investigation for malpractice. But that wasn't the end. Because on Friday afternoon, just before sunset, I came home to find a car parked outside my gate. Melissa. Alone. Sitting on the hood, sunglasses on, arms crossed. I didn't get out. She didn't move. She just stared. Then she stood up, walked to my window, leaned down and said through the glass, "You really think you've won?" I rolled the window down half an inch. "No," I said softly. "I think I've just started." She smirked, then pulled something out of her bag, and dropped it through the gap in the window. I caught it before it fell. A USB drive. She leaned closer and whispered, "You want to know what your son really did? Plug it in." Then she walked away. And I sat there frozen, holding the weight of that little plastic stick like it could explode in my hand. Because whatever was on that drive had the power to change everything. What secret does the USB hold? What did David do that even Melissa thought was too heavy to carry alone? Stay with me because the next chapter reveals the truth no mother ever wants to face. Like, comment, and subscribe, because the real storm is only just beginning. The USB drive sat on the table like a ticking bomb. I didn't touch it for an hour. I paced the room, brewed tea, poured it, didn't drink it, stared out the window and paced again. I told myself maybe it was just another manipulation. Another way for Melissa to rattle me. But a part of me, a deeper, older part, knew it wasn't. At 9:17 p.m., I sat at my desk, plugged it into the side of my laptop and held my breath. One folder. No password. Labeled simply, David. Click. Inside 4 files. The first was a PDF. Bank statement. I scrolled through, eyes scanning the numbers. Transfers. Withdrawals. Huge sums moved from our joint house account to a private offshore account under a shell company named Elmstead Consulting. Owner. David Harper. Not Melissa. My heart skipped. The second file was an email chain. Melissa to David. The subject line. "Why didn't you tell me?" She was furious. She had just discovered that David had opened the Elmstead account 3 months before I even gave them the down payment. He had planned from the beginning to funnel most of the money elsewhere. Melissa's part in the fraud. Real, but it wasn't her plan. It had been David's. My son. My baby. The one I sang lullabies to while he fell asleep on my shoulder. He had orchestrated it all. Melissa had been angry, resentful, and reckless. But David, he was the architect. The one who smiled and said, "Thank you, Ma," while emptying my life savings behind my back. The third file made me sick. It was a voice memo. David's voice. A private recording, likely from Melissa's phone. He didn't know he was being recorded. "I don't care what she gave us," he said, his voice low, cold. "She's old. She'll be dead in 10 years. What matters is getting what we need now. You think I want to end up like my dad? Penniless and worshipping a woman who controls everything. I'm not letting her dictate my life with her guilt and casseroles." I felt a sharp pain in my chest. Paused the recording. I couldn't breathe. 10 years. That was all I was worth to him. Press play again. "I'll play nice. She wants to be Queen Grandma, let her. Smile, nod and get the house. Then we disappear. She can die with her garden and her cats." I shut the laptop. Silence filled the room. I was alone in the house I bought with hands that had changed his diapers, packed his school lunches, paid for his braces and his college application fees. I remembered every birthday cake I ever baked, every night I stayed awake rocking him through croup or heartbreak. And now, he wanted me erased. 10 years. Just 10 years. I didn't cry. I sat in that chair for hours, the screen dark and the USB still plugged in. The fourth file. I didn't even open it that night. I knew enough. At 5:42 a.m. I stood up. Something in me shifted. I wasn't going to let this break me. I was going to let it build something new. Boundary. Wall. A version of me that didn't beg to be loved by people who had proven they were only capable of taking. That morning I walked into my lawyer's office and said, "We're done playing defense. I want everything." We amended the civil suit, added new charges. Wire fraud, elder financial abuse, willful misrepresentation. We submitted the voice memo. We subpoenaed the offshore accounts. And then I made one final call. To Melissa. I needed her to know. I saw everything now. That I knew the full story. When she answered, I said, "You were the flame, but David was the match. I gave him my heart, and he lit it on fire." She was quiet. Then she said something I didn't expect. "I left him." "What?" "I packed my things and moved out. I didn't know. I didn't know he was going to talk about you like that. I didn't know she stopped. Her voice broke. "I'm not a good person, Gloria. But I didn't sign up to be used either. I didn't forgive her. But I didn't hate her anymore either. Because now I saw what had really happened. David had lost himself long before Melissa ever showed up. I was just too in love with the memory of who he used to be to notice who he had become." A week later, the sheriff served David with a court summons at his job. He didn't fight it. Because he couldn't. The evidence was too strong. But the fourth file on the USB. Finally opened it. Was a video. David. Alone. Crying. Talking to the camera. "Mom. If you're watching this, I messed up. I don't know how to say it, but I'm sorry. I was angry for so long. After Dad died, I felt like I had to be everything and I couldn't live up to it. You gave and gave. And I hated that I still needed you." He looked down, wiping his nose. "I thought taking the house would make me a man. But all I did was prove I'm still a scared little boy. I know you'll never forgive me. And I don't blame you." He clicked the camera off. I don't know if the video was real, or just another layer of manipulation. I may never know. But it didn't change what I had to do. I moved back into the house. Alone. Painted the porch. Replanted the garden. I replaced the Home Sweet Home banner that Melissa never let me hang. And for the first time in years I let myself rest. But 3 months later, I received a letter. Not from David. Not from Melissa. From someone claiming to be David's half-sister. Born before I met his father. And she wanted to meet. She said David had reached out to her. That he was trying to fix things. But what she told me next, over coffee on a rainy afternoon, would rewrite the story I thought I already knew about my family. And shake the ground beneath everything I had just rebuilt. Who is this woman claiming to be David's sister? What secret has been buried since before Gloria's marriage even began? The next chapter is where old sins rise, and forgotten truths come home. Like, comment, and subscribe if you believe family secrets never stay buried for long. The rain tapped softly on the diner window as I stirred cream into my coffee, hands trembling. I was seated across from a woman in her early 40s. High cheekbones, soft brown eyes, and something eerily familiar about the way she tilted her head when she was nervous. Her name was Carla. She wore a simple black cardigan and clutched her handbag like it held the answers to the universe. She looked at me like I was someone she'd imagined 1,000 times. "I didn't come here to hurt you, Mrs. Harper," she began softly. "I just needed to know the truth." I nodded slowly. "I appreciate that. But you said David reached out to you." She exhaled and nodded. 6 weeks ago. Through a mutual contact. He told me he found out he had a sister and wanted to meet me. He said he didn't have much time to make things right. I frowned. "He never told me anything." Carla's voice wavered. "He didn't know until recently. I didn't either. My mother died last year. On her deathbed, she told me. She told me that my father was a man named Arthur Harper. Your husband." It felt like the air had been sucked from the room. Arthur. My late husband. The man I married when I was 22. The man I stood beside through every hardship. Who gave me 2 children, David and Rebecca. Or so I thought. I don't believe it, I said, trying to catch my breath. Arthur would never. Carla reached into her purse and handed me a photograph. A faded picture from the 1980s. Arthur. Young. Smiling. His arm around a woman who was definitely not me. And holding a baby. I thought maybe she was lying, Carla whispered. But then David messaged me. He said he took a DNA test after seeing an old family tree app Melissa had him download. He got a match. And it was me. I stared at the photo, heart in my throat. I loved him, I whispered. He was my whole world. I think she loved him too, Carla said. But he left her. For you. I looked up sharply. He didn't leave anyone for me, I said. When I met Arthur, he told me he was single. No children. No attachments. Well, my mother said she found out about you later. And never told him she was pregnant. I sat back, the cup in my hand rattling as I set it down. So Arthur had a child before me. A child he never knew about. And now she was sitting here in front of me. My husband's first daughter. David's half-sister. And what do you want from me? Asked, voice hollow. She shook her head. Nothing. Just to know my history. And maybe, to understand why David was the way he was. He seemed so angry. So lost. I couldn't argue with that. But this was something else. A ghost from a time I never knew existed. And now, it was breathing down the neck of everything I thought was real. After coffee, I invited Carla to the house. She hesitated but agreed. As we walked the halls, she stared at every photo, every detail, as if drinking in pieces of her father's life. I never had this, she whispered. Not one picture of him. Not even a letter. I watched her eyes fill with tears. And though I didn't know her, something cracked in me. Grief. For what she lost. For what I never knew. For the truth that had lived just outside my reach all these years. And then she said something that stopped me cold. David told me he wanted to run away from everything. That he was going to vanish. Said he couldn't face what he did. That he hated himself more than anyone else ever could. I swallowed hard. That explained the silence. The disappearance. He wasn't just hiding from me. He was hiding from himself. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in my living room, the USB drive still beside my lamp, and replayed that voice memo of David over and over. I hated the words, but I heard the pain beneath them. He had made himself into someone monstrous. But maybe, just maybe, he was finally seeing it. The next morning I got a call from a restricted number. Picked up slowly. Ma. His voice was barely a whisper. I didn't think you'd answer. I was silent. I heard you met Carla. I'm glad. She deserved to know. I deserved to know too, David. I know, he said. And I'm sorry. For everything. I'm leaving town. I just needed to say goodbye. Where are you going? I don't think that matters. He paused. I messed up. And I ruined too much to fix it. Don't do anything stupid, I said sharply. Running away doesn't fix what you broke. I'm not running, he replied. Not this time. I'm just giving you peace. I've taken enough. Then the line went dead. I tried to trace the number. Nothing. Called back. Voicemail. 3 days passed. Then a package arrived at my doorstep. No name. No return address. Just a brown envelope with my name typed across the front. Inside. Check. For $40,000. And a letter that read. For what I took. It's not enough. But it's a start. D. Tears fell before I could stop them. Not because of the money. But because I knew he was still out there. Trying. Maybe failing. But trying. Called Carla. I don't know if we're family, I said. But I'd like to try. She came over that evening. Brought dinner. We talked like two women who had both been lied to, used, and left to sort through the debris. And for the first time in months, I felt something stir in my chest again. Oh. But just as I started to rebuild something new, a letter arrived from my late husband's lawyer, one I never knew existed. And what it revealed would not only change everything I believed about Arthur, it would force me to reopen a door I had locked for good. What secret did Arthur's lawyer send? What truth was kept hidden even in death? The next chapter will shatter the past and reveal the final piece of the puzzle. Like, comment, and subscribe, because no matter how old you are, some truths still carry the power to cut. The envelope was thick, off-white, worn with age, sealed with wax like something from another century. It bore no stamp, no markings other than a single line scrawled in black ink. To be delivered to Gloria Harper only upon my death. It was from Arthur's lawyer. But Arthur had died over 15 years ago. So why was it arriving now? I sat at the kitchen table, staring at it like it might catch fire. My hands shook as I broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter, folded twice. The familiar cursive stopped me in my tracks. It was Arthur's handwriting. My husband. I unfolded it slowly and read. My dearest Gloria, if you're reading this, then I am gone, and for that I'm sorry. There are things I should have told you while I was alive, but I feared they would break what we had. What you built for us. Before I met you, I made a terrible mistake. I was young, selfish. I got involved with a woman named Lorraine. She was kind, beautiful, but I was not in a place to be a father, and when she told me she was pregnant, I ran. I convinced myself she lied. I buried the guilt. Then I met you, and you gave me the kind of love I never deserved. But I never stopped thinking about the child I may have left behind. If she ever comes to you, please don't turn her away. Her name is Carla. I don't know if she'll ever find us, but if she does, she's family. Not by marriage but by blood. Tell David. He deserves to know. And tell her I was sorry every single day. I read the letter twice, then a third time. My tears fell freely now, soaking the bottom corner of the page. Arthur had known. He'd carried it, hidden it, not to hurt me but to protect me, to keep the peace he thought we had. And in doing so, he left behind a broken girl without a father, and a wife with an incomplete truth. I felt a mix of anger and sorrow, grief and peace, 'cause now I knew. Carla wasn't some stranger reaching for a piece of a family she didn't belong to. She was family. And David. Maybe he had known this letter existed. Maybe it had been part of what shattered him. Or maybe he never saw it at all. I called Carla and asked her to come over. When she arrived, I handed her the letter in silence. She read it slowly, lips trembling. When she looked up, tears were streaming down her cheeks. He knew, she whispered. All these years he knew. He nodded. And he wanted you to know he was sorry. She clutched the letter to her chest like a treasure. I spent my whole life wondering why I wasn't enough for my father to stay, she said softly. But now, I think I can let that go. We sat on the porch for hours after that, talking, sharing. Two women on opposite ends of a secret finally given air to breathe. Later that night, as the stars blinked above the house I had reclaimed, Carla turned to me and said something I'll never forget. You know, you could have turned bitter. You could have let all of this poison you. But instead you made room for truth. For me. I smiled faintly. It nearly did poison me. But then I realized. I didn't survive everything in my life to let this be the thing that finished me. And just when I thought the last piece had fallen into place, my phone rang. Block number. I hesitated, then answered. Ma, came David's voice. I got your letter. The one you wrote me after the check. My throat tightened. And I'm coming back. I want to face you. Face everything. I don't want to run anymore. I didn't know what to say. The ache in my chest was too heavy, too wide. But somehow I found my voice. Then come. Not for me, but for yourself. There was a long silence. Carla told me about Dad's letter, he said finally. I wish he had told us sooner. We all do things too late, David. The question is, what do we do now? I'll be home by Sunday. Then the line went dead. The next 2 days passed slowly. Baked, cleaned, set out old family photos, ones of Arthur holding baby David, of Rebecca on her first day of school. I even found one of Arthur from the 1980s, the same shirt he wore in Carla's photograph. And on Sunday morning I made a decision. I pulled out the original deed to the house, signed it, transferred it to my name only, then drafted a new will. In it I wrote, "To my son David I leave not the house nor the money, but the chance to start again if he proves worthy. To Carla I leave my blessing and the space she never got as a daughter. And to myself I leave peace, the rarest inheritance of all." At 5:12 p.m., David's car pulled into the driveway. He stepped out slowly, his hair longer, his shoulders heavier. He walked up the porch stairs like a boy returning to the house where he once scraped his knees. When I opened the door I didn't say anything. I just opened my arms. He fell into them and sobbed. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "For everything." "I know," I said. "We have a long way to go. But we start here." Inside, Carla waited. And when David saw her, he stopped. She stood up slowly. He looked at her like a mirror he'd never seen before. "I have a sister," he whispered. And she nodded. "You do." They hugged, tears flowing between strangers becoming something more. And in that moment I felt the weight lift. The house that had nearly been taken from me had now become a home again, but not the same as before. Not built on blind love or unspoken truths. Built on scars, on honesty, on new beginnings. I stepped back and let them talk, let them laugh, let them begin. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is not just take the house back, but rebuild it brick by brick, into something no one can ever steal again. If this story touched your heart, if you believe that strength isn't about revenge but redemption, please like, comment, and subscribe. Every scar has a story, and every woman deserves the power to write her own ending. The days that followed felt like living in a house newly built on sacred ground. It wasn't the floors or the furniture that changed. It was the air. Softer, honest. David stayed in the guest room. Not because he was trying to reclaim space, but because he understood now. He didn't own anything here. He was asking, not assuming. And for the first time since all this began, I saw him clearly. Not as the son I wanted him to be, but as the man he had become. He apologized again, this time without crying, without theatrics. "Ma," he said quietly over morning tea, "I'll never deserve your forgiveness. I know that. I just want to live better now. You don't owe me anything." He nodded. "You're right. You don't. But I'll give you one thing, room to try again. That's all." He lowered his head, and I saw in him the boy I used to braid stories into at bedtime. Later that week, Carla and I went through Arthur's box together. Old photos, military medals, even a cassette tape with a recorded message Arthur had once made for David as a toddler. We played it on an old player I hadn't touched in years. His voice, Arthur's, filled the living room like a ghost returning to finish a sentence. "David, if you're listening to this, always take care of your mother. She's stronger than she'll ever admit, but that doesn't mean she should carry it all alone." Carla covered her mouth, and David silently walked in from the hallway and sat beside her. It was the first time I saw them as siblings, not because of blood but because of grief. They were both children of a man who had failed them in different ways. But I was still here, still alive, still able to choose what came next. And that's when I made my decision. Called my lawyer. "I want to rewrite the will," I said. He hesitated. "Again?" "Yes," I said, more certain than ever. "This time I want it to reflect what matters, not what's deserved." When we sat down the next day, I laid it out. To Carla, I left the upstairs bedroom with a window that caught morning sun, the garden out back, and 40% of the estate, because she lost her father and had been denied his love her whole life. To David I left nothing material, not land, not money, not property. But I gave him something far more valuable, a clause. Path. If after one full year of reconciliation, free of manipulation, dishonesty, or cruelty. He showed integrity and growth. He would receive the remaining 60%. If not, the estate would go entirely to Carla, or failing that, to a foundation supporting single mothers rebuilding their lives. My lawyer blinked. That's specific. Good, I said. It needs to be. Because this wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about legacy. Later that afternoon, I sat David and Carla down on the porch and told them everything. David listened, stunned but silent. Carla looked at him not with judgment but challenge. This isn't punishment, I said. It's a mirror. You decide what it shows. David nodded slowly. Fair, he said. I'll earn it. I won't ask for shortcuts. In the days that followed, we worked the land together, planting vegetables, repainting the porch, even redoing the fence that had been falling apart for years. David took a job at the local hardware store. Humble work, honest work. He came home sweaty, sore, and lighter. Carla enrolled in a writing course at the community college. She said she wanted to tell her story one day. Not for revenge, but for healing. Sometimes we sat together in silence, 3 broken hearts learning how to beat in rhythm again. But not all stories end with sunshine. Because one evening, as we returned from grocery shopping, a black SUV sat parked at the end of the driveway. Melissa stepped out. Thinner, paler. But her eyes were the same, sharp, calculating. David, she said, walking up. We need to talk. He stiffened. Carla stepped protectively in front of me. I have nothing to say to you, David replied. I'm pregnant, she blurted. Silence. Heavy. Crushing. David staggered back, blinking. What? I didn't tell you before because I knew what you'd think. But it's yours. Carla cursed under her breath. Melissa looked at me. I know I hurt you. I know I lost everything. But I'm not here for a fight. I don't want the child to suffer because of us. It was the first time she looked human. Not a snake. Not a liar. Just scared. I looked to David. His hands trembled. Carla spoke first. If this is true, you don't come here demanding anything. You come with proof, with humility. Melissa nodded. I'll get both. She left without another word. Inside, David collapsed into a chair and buried his face in his hands. What if it's true? He whispered. What if I have a child? I sat across from him and said the only thing that came to mind. Then maybe this story isn't about you anymore. Maybe it's about who that child will believe you are. He looked up slowly. And I saw it again. That flicker. That seed of a man I once believed in. But the next morning the paternity test arrived early. And with it, came a twist none of us saw coming. Because the results said, David was not the father. And yet, Melissa had never claimed another man. Until we followed the trail. And discovered a name. A man from Arthur's old job. A man who had been in Lorraine's life. And then, in Melissa's. Which meant, the child Melissa carried might not be David's cousin. Might be his sibling. Shocked. So was Gloria. Who is this mystery man tied to both Arthur and Melissa? Could Melissa's child share blood with both Carla and David? The next chapter delivers the emotional finale, the last truths, and the powerful life lesson at the heart of it all. Like, comment, and subscribe, because no family is perfect, but every ending deserves clarity. The morning light poured in through the lace curtains as I sat at the table, Carla beside me, both of us silent, waiting for David to return. He'd gone out at dawn saying only, I need to see someone. Alone. I didn't stop him. How could I? The night before had shattered us again. Just when I thought the past had finally laid itself to rest, it cracked open one last time. Melissa's baby wasn't David's. And yet it was family. A quiet DNA search had revealed something far more disturbing. The real father was a man named Thomas Avery, Arthur's former best friend. The same man who worked with him in the city office for 18 years. The same man who vanished from our lives one summer without warning. Made no sense. Until Carla sat up suddenly and whispered, My mom, Lorraine. She once mentioned someone named Thomas. She said he helped her after my father left. I remember Thomas. Charming, kind, loyal to a fault. He had been the best man at our wedding. He also had keys to our house. And years of unspoken tension with Arthur. Now, it appeared he had been involved with Lorraine long after Arthur left her. And even worse. Records showed that Thomas had lived in the same neighborhood as Melissa's family for over a decade. It didn't take much imagination to put the rest together. Melissa wasn't just some unlucky woman who crossed our path. She had been planted, or at least influenced, by someone who had his own reasons for resentment. That baby growing inside her was likely Thomas Avery's, a man with ties to both Carla and Melissa, meaning the child could be both Carla's half-sibling and Melissa's child from a man who had been obsessed with our family since the 80s. When David returned that afternoon, his face was pale. He held a single folder in his hands, his movements slow, deliberate. "I found him," he said quietly. "Thomas. He's alive." And he admitted everything. We sat in silence as he told us the truth. Thomas had felt betrayed when Arthur left Lorraine. He believed Arthur had led her on, then vanished. When she gave birth to Carla, Thomas stepped in, helped raise her from afar, paid for school clothes, sent cards. But he always kept his distance, hoping one day Arthur would return and do the right thing. Then when Arthur didn't, and married me, he grew bitter, kept tabs on Arthur, on our family, even on David. And then years later when Melissa, Thomas's biological daughter, met David at a fundraiser, he encouraged the relationship. He pushed her to win him over, to reclaim what was stolen. Felt sick. Melissa had never known the full story. But Thomas had manipulated her with tales of injustice, of a man, Arthur, who ruined lives and left them behind. So she came into our world with resentment in her blood. And David was just collateral. I sat in my chair, hands trembling, heart breaking all over again. "So what happens now?" Carla asked, her voice barely audible. David looked at us both. I told Melissa the truth. About Thomas. About everything. She broke down. Said she's moving out of state. She wants to raise the baby far away from all of this. "Will you be involved?" asked. He shook his head. "No. She doesn't want me to be. And honestly, I don't think I could be. Not right now." I nodded slowly. Carla reached across the table and squeezed his hand. We sat there, three people once fractured by deceit and silence, now woven together by the ugliest, rawest truths. Later that evening I walked into the backyard. The garden had started to bloom again. Roses I thought had died last winter were now peeking through the earth, defiant and beautiful. Carla joined me, barefoot in the grass. "You're not alone anymore," she said softly. "Even if the family you built fell apart, something new grew in its place." I smiled through tears. "Maybe that's the lesson," I said. "You can't stop people from breaking you. But you can choose how you rebuild." David joined us as the sun dipped below the trees. He placed a single daisy on the soil. "For Dad," he whispered. I looked at him. Not the boy I raised, but the man who had fallen, risen, and chosen to change. "I may not leave you the house," I said quietly. "But I'll leave you the tools to build your own." And for the first time he didn't protest. He just nodded. 3 weeks later Carla moved in. Just for a while, she said. She'd found an apartment close to the college, but she wanted to stay until the baby was born. Not Melissa's baby. Her baby. Because life, in its strange, miraculous way, had given her a second chance too. And as I sat in my porch chair one last time that spring, warm air brushing against my face, I thought about every heartbreak, every lie, every betrayal. And I realized, I didn't lose my family. I simply found the parts worth keeping. David still came by every Sunday. Carla brought flowers each week. Melissa never returned. And the house I once feared would become my grave became the very place I learned to live again. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that healing is possible, even after deep betrayal, please like, comment, and subscribe. And remember, you are never too old to rewrite the ending. Sometimes peace is just one bold decision away.